And we are back for another Dwain Woode MD Live. Man, sugar. You can't have a conversation about chronic disease without sugar coming into the conversation. You can't talk about metabolic syndrome without sugar coming into the conversation. Of course, you can't have a conversation about diabetes without sugar coming into the conversation. And right here, we are talking about the pillars of reversing diabetes. We spent a couple weeks ago, we talked about the very first pillar, that is decreasing insulin. We spent 2 weeks talking about reducing or suppressing the appetite, which was pillar number 2. And tonight we're talking about pillar number 3, and that is reducing sugar. Hey, if you're new to me, I'm Dr. Dwain Woode. That's Wood with an E. The E stands for endocrinology. Here on the channel, I educate, I empower, and I encourage you to take charge of your health and your life, avoid complications, and go to the next level. And in this year, new you. I'm talking to adults with type 2 diabetes who want to put their diabetes in remission, who want to get off of diabetes medication. In fact, those who want to reverse their diabetes. That's what we're talking about as we get into our show tonight. If you're new, go ahead and put new in the comments, because I'd love to welcome you with a hand clap and some music, and let you know that we're happy that you're here. If you're new and you do have questions, go ahead and pop those in the chat as well, in the comments, because we'd love to get to those. Make sure you put a Q in front of that question as we move through the evening, as we move through the show. If you've not done so, as I mentioned, we've been talking about diabetes, putting our diabetes in remission, and you'll see there we talked about suppressing the appetite. We did 2 shows on that. One 2 weeks ago, and then this past week we talked about part 2 about suppressing the appetite. Sure that you are getting over there and you are looking at those. And tonight, of course, we are continuing our discussion as we talk about the third pillar, and the third pillar is reducing sugar. The last couple of weeks or last couple of days, you may have heard me, and actually the last couple of weeks, as I started saying, you've heard me talk about something significant that's happening here on the channel, and that is we are celebrating 4 years. We're celebrating our 4-year anniversary, and we're going to mark that by having a 24-hour stream that is on the 16th. That's this coming Friday. We're going to be streaming for 24 hours. And you want to be sure that you are there. We're going to have some folks who are going to send in some messages to us to help us celebrate. You want to be there. We're going to recast some of our old shows, some other commentary. It's going to be a fun time, and it's an amazing feat to be here for 4 years, to be engaged with you, and to have you come through, and all of the benefits that we're seeing from our clients, from those of you who are viewing. We have continued to grow, and we are just now shy of 4,000 subscribers. In fact, let's see, what's our number? We are 3,848 subscribers. We've had 12,200 views over the last 28 days. 747 watch hours over the last 28 days, and we've had 109 new subscribers over the last 28 days. That's just the last 28 days. And if you think back to when we first started with that very first person who subscribed, I'm excited to be in the space, excited to be able to come to you and share with you. And we're going to spend some time celebrating here coming on the 16th. As we always do, also this month we're having our community meetup, our New Year, New You community meetup that we have on the 4th Thursday of every month, and that's coming up here on the 22nd. It's going to be the same link that we've used in the past, so make sure that you get there and you're participating in it. Remember what we do: we educate, we empower, we encourage, and that is a huge part of the community that you are a part of right now. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about well, not a little bit. Let's talk about our topic. Let's just hop over there. As you know, let me back up for a minute. As you know, I usually have my glucose meter and my monitors that you can see my blood sugars. Tonight, I realized, and you know, guys, I've been away camping, and I realized that my glucose meters, the ones that I usually use, are actually on the bus on the way back from camping. But I do have with me my continuous monitor. So let's go ahead and take a look at those quickly, and then we'll get into our discussion. And so here is my Libre. So my Libre says that my blood sugar over the last is 97 now. And then over the last 12 hours or so, you've seen it started up there at 150 and then continue to come down. If I go over and look at my Dexcom, you'll see what is there for the last 24 hours. For the last 12 hours, you'll see that there. And as I normally do, I do have my report. You'll see that right down below. And here is, I have my test strip that was all ready for our finger stick, but I don't have that. And then, of course, right below you'll see my my Dexcom, and we'll share more about what's been going on over the last week, right? Because we were camping, we actually had to leave early because of some storms, but we'll share that as we do our check-ins coming up later this week. So make sure that you join us for the check-ins. Make sure you join us for the anniversary celebration on the 16th. And then, of course, make sure that you are there for our community meetup that's coming up on the 22nd. Is it 22nd, did I say? I think that's what I said. Coming up on August 22nd. Yes, Thursday, August 22nd. All right. So let's go now and let's take a look at our discussion. Right, because I want us to talk a little bit about this. And this is an important one because if we think about chronic disease, right, 9 in 10 people, that's 9 in 10 people in the United States lives with a chronic disease. 1. And there are a huge number of people that live with more than one, 2 or more chronic diseases. And of the chronic diseases that we talk about, a huge number of them fall into the category of metabolic syndrome. They fall along the metabolic spectrum, if you will. And so when we talk about chronic disease, it is not uncommon to have people talking about blood sugars. And we've talked here a lot about blood sugars, and you know, as we have been talking about reversing diabetes, as we've talked about the pillars, it's very interesting that often when we get into a discussion about all the things that you can do, a lot of it comes back down to the plate, right? So diet. And as we talk about the pillars, one of the most important pillars is this idea of reducing sugar. Because as the sugar rises, we get spikes in insulin. And as we've talked about over and over, insulin is one of the biggest culprit, or insulin is the culprit when we talk about diabetes. And it is the culprit when we talk about lots of metabolic diseases as well, because insulin causes a lot of dysfunction within the metabolic space. Okay? Now, if we think about blood sugar, I want to put a little perspective on it. And the perspective is this, that when we discuss blood sugar, if I were able to take all of the sugar out of your body, right, that's running around in your blood, and I was able to distill it down into its components, then you would have within your blood 4 grams of sugar, which would be equal to 1 teaspoon. That's 4 grams, 1 teaspoon. And that is interesting because if we consider the amount of sugar that the average person eats, it is more than 4 grams. In fact, if we take a look at some of our most interesting things that we eat, and we'll take a look at 2 here. One is a candy bar. If we take a look at a Snicker bar, then a Snicker bar has 28 grams of sugar in it. If you look at the nutritional package, if you look at the nutrition package, so 28 grams of sugar. Yeah. And so if we look at one of our favorite beverages, and that is, we're going to look at a Coke here in just a minute, then it has 25 grams of sugar. Right? So 25 grams of sugar. So when we compare those things to the amount of sugar that's in your blood right now, we see this big difference. Now, if we go back and we say to ourselves, what does the average person, how much sugar does the average person eat per day? Remember I said that 1 teaspoon of sugar is equal to 4 grams. But the average person actually eats per day 17 teaspoons of sugar. 17 teaspoons of sugar. And that is huge. Because, and we'll talk here in a minute, that once we begin consuming that amount of sugar, we get big, huge spikes in our sugar level. And because we get those spikes, we now get the increase in our insulin, and then the insulin goes off to cause all the issues that we talk about. So pillar number 1 was to decrease our insulin. Pillar number 2 was to suppress the appetite. And pillar number 3 is to reduce sugar. So let's go ahead and let's talk about sugar. The first concept I want us to discuss, though, is the difference between sugar and carbohydrates. The difference between sugar and carbohydrates. And not necessarily the difference, but just to understand what they are. I used to tell people that a carb was anything that grows out of the ground. So if it grows out of the ground, then that's a carbohydrate. What I really mean to say is that things that grow out of the ground contain carbs, right? Because they also contain other nutrients and vitamins and fiber and so forth, right? So it is not in its entirety a carb, but it contains carbohydrates, a huge component of it. For instance, that orange that you eat has carbohydrates in it. It also has fiber and vitamins and minerals, right? So all those things are packaged in that fruit. So to refine that definition, then, we've got to say that carbohydrates are, or foods that grow out of the ground contain carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are organic compounds. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay? And it's one of 3 macronutrients, major macronutrients that we talk about. And we've talked about proteins and fats here in this space. And they typically come from, like I said, things that grow out of the ground. So we're talking about our grains, we're talking about our fruits, our vegetables, and also they come from dairy products. So we're talking about carbohydrates, that's where they're coming from. And why are we talking about having a conversation about carbohydrates when we're talking about fats, when we're talking about sugars? Well, let's go to this next slide and see. So there are different types of carbohydrates. There are monosaccharides, there are disaccharides, and there are polysaccharides. So mono meaning one, right? And monosaccharides are the simplest form, and we'll see that in here in just a minute. Di meaning 2, and then poly meaning many. Okay, so monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So 1 saccharides, 2 saccharides, and many saccharides. And the reason we're talking about sugar and carbohydrates, or the reason we're talking about carbohydrates in a discussion with sugar, is that monosaccharides are the simplest form of carbohydrates. If we took all the carbohydrates, or took 8 carbohydrates and broke it down to its component parts, we would break it down, and the simplest form of a carbohydrate would be a monosaccharide. And that's what we hear when we talk often about carbohydrates, when we talk about sugar, and that is that word glucose, right? So glucose is an example of a monosaccharide. Okay? Fructose is an example of a monosaccharide. Galactose is an example of monosaccharide. So when you're reading labels, when you're reading books, when you're hearing a conversation, when they mention those words, they're actually talking about monosaccharides, which are the simplest form of a carbohydrate. The simplest form. They are the building blocks for more complex carbohydrates. So when you hear someone talk about starch or glycogen, all that is a bunch of monosaccharides that have been combined, and now they form a more complex structure. Okay? And monosaccharides can be absorbed directly into the body. That is the point. That's the key, right, to our part of the conversation we're going to have. So those larger ones can't be absorbed. They actually have to be broken down. I don't know if you remember when we talked about retrogradation in one of our shows several months ago. So retrogradation is this idea that if I take a starchy food, right, and I cook it, then the starch that's in it gets denatured, gets broken down, gets ready to be absorbed. If I now take that and I put it in the refrigerator overnight, those molecules begin to coalesce. They begin to come back together. So that now if I eat it the next day, because those starches have come together, they can't be absorbed as well. Because they have to be broken down into those monosaccharides. Okay, so monosaccharides. And so common ones, because I mentioned glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then disaccharides are two, right? So two pieces of monosaccharides together, and they are now called disaccharides. And these have to also be broken down to be absorbed. So remember, you can't absorb disaccharides or polysaccharides. You can only absorb monosaccharides. There's a caveat there, but we won't get into that. So things like sucrose, right, which is table sugar, is a combination of glucose and fructose. It's a combination of the two. Di, right, two. Lactose, which comes from milk, is a combination of glucose and galactose. So two of them. And then, of course, maltose is a combination of two glucose molecules. They come together, and that's what a disaccharide is. But as I mentioned, even in those, we cannot absorb disaccharides. We have to be broken down into monosaccharides. And then, of course, our polysaccharides, these are complex carbohydrates. These are, when we talk about carbohydrates, these are the things we're talking about. That bread, that pasta, that rice, and so forth. They serve as energy storage. So when the body takes in monosaccharides, in order to store those, it can't store them as glucose, fructose, galactose. It has to combine them again, and they get stored, for instance, in the liver as glycogen. Okay, so starch is a polysaccharide. Starchy vegetables, right? They have polysaccharides. Glycogen, right? That storage form in the body, and of course, other long chains of glucose units are polysaccharides. And it's important to understand those because you will see them in foods, you will have discussions about them, and even as we talk tonight, you'll hear me mention those, and so you want to be sure that that you understand. So monosaccharides are the simplest forms. Disaccharides are combinations of monosaccharides, and of course polysaccharides is just a big chain of monosaccharides. So what happens when we eat? When we eat, the body takes the carbohydrates, and in the mouth there is this thing called salivary amylase, and we've mentioned this before in one of our other shows. So salivary amylase is an enzyme that as soon as you put something in your mouth, a carbohydrate, it begins to chop it up, it begins to break it down. If you remember when we used vinegar, vinegar inhibits the process of that breakdown. Okay? Yeah, remember? Right. So anyway, so salivary amylase, you put it in your mouth, you eat some carb, and salivary amylase begins breaking that down, getting it ready for absorption. And then you swallow it, and the pancreatic amylase comes out, and pancreatic amylase divides it, breaks it down into disaccharides. So we go from a poly, so that many, it breaks it down into those disaccharides. But remember, we still can't absorb disaccharides. And then the brush border, the part of the GI tract, breaks those disaccharides down. And I won't mention those names, or you won't have to remember those. These are things like maltose and lactose, right? They break down the disaccharides into the monosaccharides, and then our body can absorb them. And the body absorbs those monosaccharides into the bloodstream. And when it gets into the bloodstream, then, of course, that's when things begin. So let's go back and let's talk about that brush border. So those maltose and lactose and all of those enzymes that are there, that's why people can develop what? They can develop lactose intolerance, for example, because they're missing or there's deficiency in the enzymes that are in the GI tract. And so they eat something or drink something that has lactose or is broken down into lactose, but because the lactase actually is missing, then it can't break the lactose down. That's the sugar form. And so they begin having issues because there's that sugar now that's traveling through their GI tract. And so that's where the idea of lactose intolerance comes from. Okay? All right. And then let me pause here for just a sec because I see one of our community members hopping in. Hey, Teresa. Teresa say, hey, doctor and everyone. Is this really you? She says, is this really you? And it is really me. Teresa, you're talking about our pre-recorded shows. Yes, this is really me now. Right here in person and live and in person. Is that what they say? Live and in person. Yes, right. I'm here. So glad that I could be here with you guys. All right. So thank you for coming out. And I was actually out visiting. We took a trip down to Gillette, Wyoming. That's where our camping trip was. And I passed through Nebraska. We passed through Nebraska on the way. And I sent a message to one of our other community members as I was going through. Hopefully you got that. All right. She said... Teresa says, hooray. She said, missed you. Missed you guys as well. All right. So let's hop back over. So we're talking about digestion. We take those monosaccharides, or we take the polysaccharide, right? Carbohydrates in the mouth. Salivary amylase begins to chop it up. Pancreatic amylase breaks it down further. And then it becomes maltose, lactose. And then those brush border enzymes breaks it into from the disaccharides into the monosaccharides, and that can be absorbed, right? Because remember, monosaccharides can be absorbed. The polysaccharides cannot be absorbed. So carbohydrates. So we said simple. Okay, so simple carbohydrates are rapidly absorbed, right? So these are sugars. They're rapidly absorbed. They cause a quick spike in blood sugar. Diets that are high in simple sugars are linked to diseases in the metabolic spectrum. Whoa. Let's pause there. Let's pause there. Because that's a big point to be made. When we talk about and let's see, let's get rid of this one. There you go. So when we talk about monosaccharides, remember those are the things that are absorbed. When we talked about those guys, remember they can be readily absorbed. And so when our body absorbs them, depending on how much, then we can get those big spikes in our blood sugars. And when we get the spike in the blood sugar, what happens? We get the insulin that comes out. The insulin comes out, and the insulin causes all of those issues that we talk about when we discuss metabolic disease. So simple sugars will cause those spikes, and diets that are high in those will cause tremendous issues for us. All right. So what happens when we have excess monosaccharides, right? And this is where we get into that metabolic disease. So glycogenolysis, or glycogenesis, in the liver and skeletal muscles. So the body takes it up, right? So we absorb those monosaccharides, and we use some for your brain to move, to work, for your lungs to inhale and exhale, for muscles to work. And then the body takes some and it sends it, the storage, the excess, into the liver, and it stores it there. We'll come back to talk about that in a minute. And then it sends it to the muscle. And glycogen that's stored in the muscle tends to be used locally in the muscle. So it doesn't get shipped off anywhere else. It just goes to the muscle, and the muscle, when the muscle needs energy, it will begin burning that glycogen. Okay? In the liver, a different story. Okay? So the first thing is we get glycogenesis. Number 2, we get lipogenesis. What's lipo? Lipo is fat. So some of those monosaccharides are converted now to fat. And that's this thing right here, right? We get abdominal obesity. And we're talking about excess, not just what we need. Because remember we said that in your blood right now, you probably have about 4 grams. If your blood sugar is normal, let me say that. You probably have about 4 grams of sugar, 1 teaspoon in your blood. But the average American eats 17 teaspoons per day. That's everything total. That is the carbs that you eat in your food, the things that you drink, right? All of that is included in that 17 teaspoons, right? And then, so not only do we get glucogenesis, we get lipogenesis. And if the amount that you take in exceeds the ability of the liver to store it and of the muscles to store it, then now we get hyperglycemia. That's elevated blood sugar. Notice what happened. We ate, the body broke it down into the monosaccharides, we absorbed it, and now the monosaccharides are in your blood and they're getting ready to do all the things that they need to do. Run your heart and your liver and your lungs and so forth. And then it stores some of it if we have excess. We store some of it in the liver, we store some of it in the muscles. If there's excess, the excess has to go somewhere. One of the places it goes is causing high blood sugar, hyperglycemia. And then it shuttles it, right, into cells, or into, converts it into free fatty acids or triglycerides, right? And now we've got high cholesterol. Yes? It goes into vessels, and now we've got fatty infiltrates. Cholesterol infiltrates in our vessels, now predisposing us to cardiovascular disease. If the liver gets full, the liver says, hey, I can't take any more. So now it begins packaging that, and it forms it into fat, like we just talked about. And that fat now can get stored in the liver, and now we have fatty liver. Right? Notice the progression. And that all now leads to this idea of metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome. And what is the metabolic syndrome other than, and these are the components, abdominal obesity, high blood pressure, impaired glucose, high triglyceride levels, and low HDL. All the things that we've just talked about. All those are components of metabolic syndrome. So when we're talking about excess in terms of our glucose, we're not talking about simple, oh, we have just a little bit excess of sugar. We're talking about significant impairment in the body's ability to function. And so as a result of that, we begin developing diseases that are in that metabolic spectrum. And this actually is the idea, and you've probably heard me say it before. If not, let me say it again, that when we talk about diseases in the modern time, when we talk about diseases in this era, we are, for the most part, talking about diseases that fall into what we call the lifestyle spectrum. What does that mean? If you go back years ago, people had morbidity and people had mortality from diseases that came from infection or from trauma. So they got an infection and we didn't have the correct antibiotic, we didn't have the correct treatment, and so as a result of that, they had complications, and they may have died. They had morbidity or residuals from that. As we move into the era now, we're seeing that more and more our disease, I should say more and more, but a huge part of our disease, those chronic diseases that I talked about, 1 in 10 people, or 9 in 10 people, those are diseases of lifestyle. And when we talk about lifestyle, other than exercise and sleep and stress, a lot of it has to do with food. And the place where we're having the issue is with this idea of sugar. So reducing sugar when we reduce sugar, it goes a long way in improving those metabolic diseases, those metabolic things that we see as it comes to when it relates to our health and our wellness. And you recall that I said that in addition to diabetes, because diabetes is the prototypic metabolic disease, in addition to diabetes, we are talking about hypertension, hyperlipidemia, coronary artery disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and on and on and on and on. Okay, so we're not just talking about diabetes, although it's the prototypic disease, but all of those other diseases will get improvements as well. And great place for me to pause for just a minute and say hello to Steve, another one of our community members. Hey, Steve, how you doing, man? Glad to be here. He said, glad we're back. I'm glad to be back as well. Glad to be in this space with you guys. I thought about you guys as I was away, and hopefully you guys had a good time with the content that we put together for you. All right, but yes, glad to be back in this space. So let's go back and let's talk again. So remember, decrease insulin, suppress appetite, and reduce sugar. So insulin is the culprit, and the appetite is the vehicle that brings the sugar, which is the stimulant. I want you to see that progression, right? So it is the 3 pillars are all connected. They're interconnected. Remember, the insulin is causing the damage. The insulin is the thing that we want to truly, truly get rid of. But what causes that, right? A lot of it has to do with sugar. And sugar from any source, whether it's that you consume it, or it comes because you are stressed, or you're not sleeping, or any kind of the cortisol effects. You guys remember that when we did the show last week, in one of the check-ins, we talked about DAMSIC, diet, activity, medication, sleep, inflammation, and cortisol effects, right? So sugar comes from wherever. It doesn't matter where the sugar comes from. It will cause a spike in the insulin. But the appetite is a huge vehicle for those 17 teaspoons of sugar that we're eating. Okay? So as we look at those, as we look at the reducing the sugar, it's very important that we do that. And this is really just setting the basis for conversation that we're going to have over the next several weeks as we talk about the ability of sugar to short circuit our desire, short circuit our decision, short circuit our I don't want to say our will, but it's almost like an addiction. We'll share some of that in our future videos, future episodes. But can you think of, and let me tell you a story. I'll tell you a story. And I was going to tell you one story, but I can even pick a story from this past week, right? So we were out there in Gillette, Wyoming. 5 to 7,000 above sea level, right? So the air is thin, and it was dusty. And we're going to bed late, right? We traveled there. It took us 2 days or so to get there. Going to bed late at night, right? So we've got a bunch of kids that we're transporting there. We're expecting to see about 55,000 people, I think the final number was. And so we got there, we put the tents up, and I am the medical person, right, in charge of the medical team. And so we've got a group of people that are in charge of medical team. And we get there, and once we get there, because of the altitude and because of the dust, we start to have a lot of people in our camp and in other camps around us, right? Because we were just a part of the camp. These 55,000 people. We were just a small component of the camp. So we had people from other camping groups that were actually coming over to us for medical attention. So we've got these kids, and so because of the dust and the altitude, so they may have been having some coughing and respiratory issues. We gave inhalers, and so I'm up late at night. And my plan was that I was going to continue my fast while I was there. Oh yeah. But guess what? It didn't happen, right? So I kept starting the fast, right? But late one night, when they called me with the kid that was having some difficulty breathing, on my way back, I grabbed some crackers. And you know what? My brain said, "Oh, what did you just do? What did you just give us?" And it wasn't like regular crackers. It was crackers there was a sweeter crackers. They had some peanut butter or something in there. My brain was like, yes, give us some more of that. And so the next day, right, so we went through and I did a 23-hour fast. And I got there and was eating some food, but my brain remembered that cracker from the night before and said, give me some more of that. So I ended up eating some more crackers. And then, yeah, right? So the taste, and we've talked about taste before, the environment, the stress, the fatigue, right? So all of that plays into our eating, and we're going to talk more about how our dopamine and our insulin and our glucagon play together to stimulate this process that's going on that we need to take control of, right? So that's going to be a big part of it. We're going to talk also about what are some tools and what are some skills that we can do or we can use to be able to overcome that. Now, one of the things that we've been using, right, is this idea of fasting. So we'll talk more about fasting later this week, but I want to throw that in because that was coming in, right? Because the ability to fast blunts this or short circuits the sugar that comes in, right? Because what we're doing is we're retraining our taste buds. Because during the fasting period, we're not putting anything in, and so that decreases the insulin. Decreasing the insulin decreases the appetite, and then we're already not putting anything in, so now we've suppressed our sugar. Okay, you see that? You see that cascade? But that's how that works. But suppressing the sugar, reducing sugar, pillar number 3 in our process of reversing our diabetes, and it is a huge one. So we're going to spend several weeks coming and talking about different components of this. We did a Sugar Busters challenge several weeks ago. Was it 2 years ago, I think. And we've got those videos that we created into a course, and I'm going to, for our community members, I'm going to open up that course and make it available to you guys so you can go through and begin watching some of those videos and kind of get an idea along with what we're going to be doing here on the channel. Okay, this is a little workbook that I've put together for you to begin walking through. We're going to open up some of the modules in that course so that you can begin watching those. Okay? All right. And Teresa's laughing. Teresa, she's laughing at the brain. Yeah. I'm telling you, the brain is something else. The brain is something else. We ended up having to leave early, as I mentioned before, because we had some storms. We had a storm. We actually had to go take shelter. And that one was pretty hefty. Lots of scared people. And then we had another one that we were getting ready to take shelter, but it blew over. But the thing that finally ended the camp early was that another storm was getting ready to come through, and they said that this one was going to be worse than the one we had 2 nights before. And so the higher ups decided, hey, we've got 55,000 people here, we can't chance that, and so we ended the camp early and began coming home. But as someone who likes camping, I had an amazing time. Now it was like real camping, y'all. This was not, as they say, glamping. This was intense with rain, cold, waking up in the morning and having to dry out part of the tent. Now in the tent there wasn't a lot of water, but around the tent, and anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But, and I apologize, I think you may hear this is the guy outside doing our lawn, but being able to reduce our sugar is going to play a big part in what we do here in reversing our diabetes. All right, so let's go ahead, let's take a look at blood sugars, right? Because that's important as well, because it does go to some of what we're talking about here tonight. And here's my average blood sugar over the last 2 weeks, right? 146. If we go back to my 90-day, you'll see it was 116, with being in target 86% of the time, with a glucose management indicator of 6.1. And this last week, let me go back and let's do this. So this last week, you'll see that, well, let's do 30 days. Yeah. So if we look at this last week, you'll see that these last 2 weeks really popped that up. Okay. If we go and we look at the daily report, and so my last meal, by the way, was yesterday about 9 p.m. Is it 9 p.m.? Let's see. Let me check because I recorded that. Yesterday at 7 p.m. Yeah, yesterday about 7 p.m. So we ate our last meal, and that's what that spike is right there. And then over the course of the next, until now, right? So last night, so we're about 24 hours now, and you'll see that we went from 100 and, well, this one was 206, 194, and then down now to 100. We dipped earlier today down to 90, up to 94. If I go back and take a look at previous days, right, and you'll see here are my fasting attempts, right? So come into the day, blood sugar is going down, 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 and here, I don't know, maybe I got woken up to come take care of someone, and blood sugar went up, right? So that was Sunday. And here, look at this day, right? So this day, I think I pretty much ate for most of the day. This was Saturday. And we were actually traveling back home by this time, I think. And we got up to, yeah, up to about 3:20. And we were in the car, and my wife said, "Why is your monitor going off?" And I said, it went up. I think it started going off right around here, right around 200. And then boom, 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 boom. You see that big spike. And previous days, right? So once again, this is my fasting attempt, and then, okay, let's eat. Boom, 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 boom. Going back to, and prior to that, my Dexcom actually expired. So I actually had to have my wife bring one to me. So she came out afterwards and she brought one to me, and then we put it up here. But let me do something else really quickly. Let me pull up. Let's see. Let's do it this way. I'm gonna pull up my Libre because I think my Libre was on. So I'm gonna pull up my Libre. So those days where we didn't have from the Dexcom, we should have with the Libre. All right, here we are. All right, so let's go back over here. All right, so here's my Libre coming up, and what I want to do is take a look at those daily patterns. Well, let's go back and let's look at the AG report. And you see my average blood sugar over the last 2 weeks, according to this, was 102. This is May 15 to, this is actually, no, 90 days. Let's see. Yeah, this is a 90-day report. But let's look at the last several days. So we started our trip right here Saturday of last week. We left. Okay, and so we had broken. So leading into that, remember we had broken the fast, and then Saturday ate as we were traveling on the road. You'll see that there. Um, Let me do it this so you can actually see. Give me just a second. Turn this on. Okay, here we go. So yeah, so Saturday, you'll see that there. Sunday, and then by Monday now we're in camp. We're in camp on Monday, and Monday I said, okay, I'm gonna start fasting because I'm thinking about you guys. And I started fasting. Blood sugars are going down. So Monday did well, and then here through the day not so bad, and then right about here was probably when the medical tent was swamped, and so that started my attempts to fast. And you'll see there spiking up, spiking up, spiking up, and then into where we are now as we're moving into, okay, we started fasting and started fasting. So here's where we are right now. Okay. And I showed that to you. I was talking to someone recently, and they said to me that they said, well, why do you show your monitors, and why do you show your blood sugars, and why do you show I said, because, well, several reasons, really. Number one, as you're watching, as we're in this community together, I want you to understand that it is a daily thing that you've got to do. This isn't something that you did last week or last month or last year. That is not a struggle. And I'll tell you, those the heat model, right? The heat model comes into play for me every single day. Now, that's not to say, right? Because sometimes people hear that and they get frustrated because, like, man, I'm going to be struggling with this for the rest of my life. That's not to say that my day to day is not easier or better or more manageable than it was yesterday, right? So as I learn and as I am sitting in the space, I am doing better and better, right? And as a matter of fact, I think I mentioned to you guys that I enjoy fasting. I love getting into fasting because when I'm coming up to fasting, it's like I get this huge burst, this push of energy, because it's something I have control over, right? Number one, because it is, for a long time, there was this struggle that I had with blood sugars and weight, even as I was in the process of talking to other people about the very same thing. Right? So that's number one. Number two, it is a process. And that's what I keep saying. If you hear me when I talk about the heat model, we talk about that emotional component. I say it's like a roller coaster. And if you let that roller coaster get up here, it doesn't matter what you do. The roller coaster is coming down the other side. So the key is to put things in place that manage, deal with, blunt that rise in that roller coaster, which I didn't do a good job of when I went out, because I thought, yeah, this is going to be great. We're going out there, we're going camping. I like camping. We're going to have a great time, right? Not accounting for the influx of people that were having issues, right? Because I had planned how this was going to be in my head. I had all my equipment. I have all my medication. I have all this stuff, right? But we got there, and it was much more than I anticipated. And not just much more than I anticipated in terms of the numbers, but also in terms of the environment. Right? It was cold and wet, and we've got these storms, and the kids are afraid, right? So we have to deal with all of that. And as a part of that, right, my buffering behavior was food, right? Because those emotions did that, and they're climbing, and they're climbing, and they're climbing. So the other reason that I do it is so that you know that you're not by yourself. right? So I'm not telling you stuff that I gleaned from a book. I'm not telling you stuff that I am theorizing about. I'm telling you stuff. This is boots on the ground. This is a daily thing. Probably a couple of years ago now, I'm thinking I did a little session with a friend of mine who was a coach, and I was telling him about the whole situation. I mentioned to him, I said, what do you do when you're at the endocrinologist, right? You struggle. And he said to me very clearly, very plainly, he said, well, that's your story right there. Right? So my story to you is the story of my life. My discussions with you is the story of my life. Now, I'm not expecting you guys to be my therapist, right? I'm expecting you to be my community, right? That's why I keep pushing the community, because the community is huge for you and for me, right? Because in this space, we get to see each other, we get to encourage each other, and we get to move forward together. I love that. That's what I love about this space. So that is pillar number 3, episode 1. And we're going to come back. We're going to talk a lot more about this, because this one is a huge one. All right. The others are big, but this concept of sugar and carbohydrates, that's where a lot of people will struggle, right? So they struggle with appetite. They struggle with appetite because there's a whole, thing with appetite, a whole community, a whole process with appetite. But the sugar is where a lot of people fall down. Sugar, and when I say sugar, I'm including carbs, because remember, the sugars that we talk about are simply simplified versions of the carbohydrates. Right? We talk about sugar, we're talking about the smallest monosaccharide component, but they are created from breaking down those bigger, more complex carbohydrates. Okay? Awesome. All right. So so I've mentioned to you that later on this week, on the 16th, we have our anniversary celebration. So we're going to be doing a 24-hour stream. And the stream is, we're looking back over the course of the past year and looking at several of the shows that we've done. We have some folks that have sent in some information, sent in kudos and congratulations. We're going to play those between the videos. Come on and celebrate that with us. On the 22nd of this month is our next community meetup. That we do that once a month. Make sure that you are there hanging out with us. Over the course of the next several days, we'll be doing our check-ins as we normally do, back into the saddle. We'll share with you my glucose meter and my Keto Mojo are on their way. They're supposed to be heading here in just a couple of hours, and we'll get those off and get them back into the swing of things. But as we move through our month, remember, we do a challenge every month, and our challenge this month, as we're talking about sugar, is 1 week. I want you to pick 1 week, and for that week, no added sugar. That's right. For 1 week, pick a week. It could be, you can start it today, but for 1 week, no added sugar. And when I say added sugar, that means that you're not eating anything that has, when you're looking at your package, right, no added sugar. That doesn't mean no oranges or apples, but no applesauce with added sugar, no orange juice, okay? Right, those processed. And I guess I should refine that a little bit. How about, no added sugar and no processed sugar. Let me do it that way, okay? Because as I was thinking about that just now, orange juice, right? You drink orange juice, that's a pack full of sugar, but it's not added sugar. Or it doesn't have to be. There can be added sugar. But that's the challenge for this month. 1 week where you're not consuming any added sugar in your meals, in your food. All right? Okay, and then let's talk a little bit about the potential that you have. And remember that you have unlimited potential at your fingertips. You can do it. There is unlimited ability that you have to create and to be in the space of wellness. You can do it. We do it here by educating, empowering, and by encouraging, because that's what we do. We educate with the shows, with the blogs, with the podcast. We empower with the tools that we learn, and we encourage with the community that you are a part of. And we're just so happy that we have some amazing community members. Remember the HEAT model that tells us the triggers that push us in a direction of eating, right? As I just mentioned, habits, emotions, access, and taste. Those are the ones, right? Find out which one you have, which is the thing that pulls at you. And then, of course, our call to action is this: join our challenges. We just gave a challenge of decreasing or cutting out sugar, added sugar, for 1 week, right? That's a challenge for this month. We have had several challenges over the course of the year so far. Go back and see those on our show, on our channel, and join them. Also, when you come, tell your story. Where are you? Are you fasting? What successes have you had? Right? Is your A1C lower? Have you lost weight? Are you off of medication? Right? That would be great. And then share this with somebody. Invite a friend. Don't just let this be something that's on the shelf, on the counter, but join in and share it with someone. And then, of course, our pillars, as we've been going through. Number one, the pillar is decreasing our insulin, suppressing appetite. And of course, as we delve into the third pillar for reversing diabetes tonight, reduce your sugar. Reduce your sugar. Love it, love it, love it. As always, I'm happy to be here with you. Let's see. Steve said, did you say 22nd for community? Yes, the 22nd is the community meetup. That's the fourth Thursday. And we'll try to keep doing that the fourth Thursday of every month. It'll be the same link. So we'll get that out to you probably next week. I won't put it in if you still have it, great, but we'll put that out next week as well as we get into or get closer to that. But the fourth Thursday of the month is our community meetup. Awesome. All right. Well, guys and gals, glad to be here in this space with you. As I always say, this is Dr. Dwain Woode. That's Wood with an E. The E stands for endocrinology. Here on the channel, I educate, I empower, and I encourage you to take charge of your health and your life, avoid complications, and go to the next level. And in this year, new year, new you. Good night. We'll see you later this week for our check-ins. We'll see you on the 16th for our anniversary celebration, 24-hour stream. And then we will see you on Sunday for this week in review. Good night, everybody.